Welcome to Beardy, Bruce Lee Central.
Hey everybody, it's Birdie here. What's going on, guys? Okay, you can imagine my shock and surprise when I get this mail from a guy that says he was a close friend of Steven Seagal back in the 60s and 70s, and he was there when Steven Seagal met Bruce Lee, and he saw everything. So I said to the guy, okay, go on, explain exactly what happened here in detail. And that's what he did. So he said that Steven Seagal used to live in Fullerton, California, which is just a few minutes away from Culver City, California, where Bruce Lee bought a house in 1967. And I did my research, and it turns out that is true, guys. Steven Seagal did indeed live in Fullerton, California, which is close by to Culver City, California. And in 1970, Steven Seagal started traveling to Japan, and he was training Aikido in Japan from 1970 to 1972. And in this period, he would travel back and forth from Fullerton, California to Japan. And after a couple of years of doing Aikido in Japan, Steven Seagal thought he was it. He was now the greatest martial artist to ever live. This is according to his friend, right? So he said that he just had his ego was up in the sky, you know. He just thought he was the greatest martial artist ever. Just after a couple of years of doing Aikido in Japan. So while he was in Japan, he saw a Bruce Lee movie for the first time, okay? And he was infatuated with this person, this Bruce Lee. And he started watching more Bruce Lee movies. And his friend basically said that he was in love with Bruce Lee, right? And he started doing some research on Bruce Lee. He wanted to find out who this guy was. And to his surprise, to his shock, it turns out that Bruce Lee was living in Culver City, California, which is close to Fullerton, California, where Steven Seagal was living. So he decided then and there that he was going to pay Bruce Lee a visit the next time he was in California. And that's exactly what he did. He asked his friend if he wanted to join him, and they were going to go over to Bruce Lee's house, basically just knock on his door. Remember, there was no social media or Twitter or Facebook or whatever back in these days. So they were going to go and knock on his door and just pay this guy a visit, talk to him, spar with him, whatever. There was no plan. They just wanted to meet Bruce Lee, okay? So yes, his friend accepted. They said, "Okay, I'll join you." And the next time he was in Fullerton, California, he went over to Bruce Lee's house and they knocked on his door, and there was no answer. So they started going back on the backyard of the house, and that's where they saw Bruce Lee with his friends working out in the backyard. And Steven Seagal went over to Bruce Lee and he introduced himself, etc., etc. And to his friend's surprise, Steven Seagal demanded a sparring match with Bruce Lee then and there. And Bruce Lee and his friends were basically just laughing at this guy. And Bruce Lee was like, you come over to my house just uninvited and just ask for sparring match. I mean, I mean, that's not how it works, guys. You can't just come to someone's house like that, okay? And Steven Seagal was adamant, and he didn't want to leave until he had a sparring fight with Bruce Lee, okay? And that's where the fight started, okay? And it was not a sparring match because Bruce Lee wanted to teach this guy a lesson, okay? And his friend said that the fight didn't last long and that Steven Seagal was so messed up, he was so battered and messed up that they had to call an ambulance to come and get Steven Seagal. So that's how bad of a shape he was in after the fight. So I asked him for more detail, and basically all he said was that Bruce Lee was basically just using his kicks. he was basically, his hands were behind his back, and Bruce Lee was only using kicks against Steven Seagal, and that Steven Seagal was battered after a couple of minutes, and that they had to call an ambulance to get and pick up Steven Seagal. And that's basically the end of the story there. Uh, Steven Seagal got demolished, and yeah, there's no more to the story. I asked the guy for more detail, and he said that that's it. And from that day on, Steven Seagal hated Bruce Lee. And that actually explains why Steven Seagal is going around trash talking Bruce Lee all the time, because he got destroyed by this guy. He was probably embarrassed because he thought he was the greatest martial artist to ever live. After doing a couple of years of Aikido in Japan, he thought he was all that, but obviously he was not. So, yeah, there we go, guys. Steven Seagal versus Bruce Lee. Who would have thought? I mean, obviously, we have to take this with a grain of salt. I mean, there's no way of proving or disproving any of this ever happened, okay? Like Steven Seagal, he claims he met Bruce Lee. We all know that. But we all know that I also exposed him, that Bruce Lee, I was sure that Steven Seagal never met Bruce Lee. Uh, and to this day, to be honest, I'm not sure if this story checks out or not. Uh, it's like I said, this happened. It's such a long time ago. It's impossible to prove or disprove this. But everything this guy said, his friend, checks out. Like the time period and the location of Fullerton and Culver City, it all checks out. And yes, he did train Aikido in Japan. And yes, Bruce Lee was popular in Japan in those days. So it's logical that Steven Seagal would have seen his first Bruce Lee movie in Japan while he was there training. So I mean, it all of this checks out, but in the end of the day, there's no way of proving or disproving this. So, like I said, we have to take this with a grain of salt. But it would explain why Steven Seagal trash talks Bruce Lee all the time, you know. Uh, and claiming he also claims Steven Seagal claims that Bruce Lee liked Aikido, and that's not true at all, guys. Bruce Lee was not a fan of Aikido at all. Like he considered implementing some forms of Aikido in Jeet Kune Do, but eventually he went away from it because Aikido was too stagnant of a sport. There's no agility. There's very little movement. It's more like you're using your arms a lot as like leverage and to pivot your opponent, and there's no like fluidity to Aikido. And probably there is fluidity to Aikido if you go to back in time to these early grandmasters of Aikido. They were more agile then than the Aikido you see today. And yeah, like I said, Bruce Lee was not a fan of Aikido at all. So Steven Seagal claiming that Bruce Lee was a fan of Aikido. And not only that, Steven Seagal claimed that he taught Bruce Lee Aikido. I mean, he was that didn't happen. If they ever met, this is what happened, what his friend told me, okay? That he knocked on his door, no one answered the door. They went around to his backyard, and Bruce Lee got angry and he beat his ass. I mean, that's if they ever met, that is the most logical explanation to what happened, what would have happened, okay? So I mean, if there's any story out there, and trust me, I get a lot of stories sent to me. If there's any story about Steven Seagal and Bruce Lee that we are to believe, this is the story. I mean, I think this is the closest we will ever get to having a legitimate meeting between Steven Seagal and Bruce Lee. So yeah, guys, there we go. Steven Seagal versus Bruce Lee. It might have happened. It might have like I went from being 100% sure that this did not happen, that this never happened, to actually thinking that it is possible, and that Steven Seagal made up a lie, that he met Bruce Lee with James Coburn and that they trained together, when in fact Bruce Lee got his ass kicked by Bruce Lee, uh, one random day. Just one random day, walks up to his house, knocks on his door, goes to his backyard, and there he is, and basically demands a sparring fight. And yeah, that's it. Okay, guys, that's it for me. And thank you guys for listening. See you guys later. Bye.